Hi, good morning. This is Gene from Listening In WN9ZWC KB9001MWDX SSB SWL, etc., etc. I just wanted to touch bases with you guys this morning and talk about a very common mode in ham radio, and that's VHF and UHF. Mainly VHF for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, referring to the wavelength of each of those bands. And I'm going to address 2 meters mostly, though. There's a lot of 2 meters and 70 centimeter repeaters, or 140 or 144 and 440 repeaters, as they call them. Because that talks about the radio frequency range it's in, 144 and 440 megahertz. And by the way, here's one of my 2 meter handhelds. I have a couple 2 meter handhelds, and I have two mobile radios, and one of them is hooked up as a base in my shack. And a lot of ham radio operators spend a lot of time on 2 meters, and 2 meters is used primarily for emergency services like RACES and ARES, and for weather spotters. So it's very prevalent in the ham radio community. And I would have to venture to say that if you're a ham radio operator, you more than likely, beside that HF rig, which you like to get on and talk around the world, I bet you have a 2 meter rig, or at least a 2 meter handheld in your repertoire, because that's usually how, probably a large amount, or maybe 90% of ham radio operators come into the hobby, and they start off with 2 meters. And who knows, maybe some others come in and, they go, jump right to general and go get an HF rig, and I'm sure they do that too, but many of them, I would say most, start off in 2 meters. But the part of 2 meters I want to talk about is antennas. You don't need the biggest antenna on the block to talk on 2 meters. The thing with frequencies is the higher the frequency, and say you're up in the VHF, like 144 megahertz is VHF, 440 is UHF. So you're getting up into the very high and ultra high frequency. The higher the frequency, the more that signal or frequency begins to act like a beam of light. It is very concentrated. It goes in a straight line. And it also has a tendency to go, say, straight across the terrain. And as the Earth begins to curve, it continues in a straight line beyond that curve. So that's why we have repeater systems. And if you look on ARRL, or you go online and you plug in the word ham radio repeater, you're going to get a lot of hits, and you have state coordinators in each state that coordinate repeaters. And what's a repeater? A repeater is a radio transceiver that takes your signal, it accepts your signal, and it retransmits it from the repeater to cover a certain area. So it's kind of a retransmitting station, for lack of better terminology. I'm sorry, I'm not a tech. I'm one of those end user guys, so I'll try to explain it. So that radio signal goes in on an input frequency and is transmitted out on a different frequency. You have input and an output frequency, and the receive side is that output, the output from the repeater. And it repeats it by whatever the strength of the repeater is, whatever the power of the repeater is. So if it happens to be, a 50 watt repeater, goes out at 50 watts. It happens to be 100 watts, it goes out at 100 watts. So it has a tendency, and depending on location and terrain and where it's located, it could have a very big footprint. There are some repeater systems throughout the United States that are linked to each other. I've heard of some out west where they have linked repeaters that could cover multiple states. That's very good for emergencies, and if something went down, and you had like a bad weather event like we had here a couple of years ago, you would be able to stay on the air, because most of those repeaters also have backup emergency power. If they're not completely taken out, they will operate. But with that said, I'm very big into low profile antennas and easy to use antennas. And so I went looking around for, say, low profile antennas, because I don't want an antenna on my roof. I don't want a big mast on my house. I don't want a tower on my house. I wanted to do something low key. Like I showed people in one of my videos, I showed them my HF antenna. It's very low profile, and it's on a flexible piece of PVC pipe in an inverted V. So it's very It's very small, and people really don't know what it is, and it's not an eyesore. It doesn't bother. I wanted something that wouldn't bother the neighbors or alarm the neighbors if they didn't know what they were looking at. So I did the same thing with VHF. So I went looking around for an antenna, and this was a solution that I found. So what this is here, this is called a Slim Jim antenna, and you can find these online if you just went in and you punched in Slim Jim antennas. You're going to probably come to a website from a company that produces them. I believe the company is like something like November 9 TAX or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact name of the company. I believe I'm calling it right. But they built these Slim Jim antennas, and they're made out of a piece of ladder line. And what they did with the ladder line is actually very flexible in many ways. It's actually it's physically flexible, and it's flexible to do different things with. And I don't know if you can see this. I want to show you the end of this this antenna the best that I can. But what you see is they soldered. Oh, if I can get a picture of that. No, not really. There we go. So what they did is they soldered the ends of the ladder line, and if you go to the other side, they actually did the same thing on the other side. So here's the solder. They soldered the ends of the wire together as it came through the ladder line, because there's two wires going down each end of the ladder line, and they snipped it here. So why would they do this? So what this is called, this is a folded dipole. So it's actually a dipole antenna. But the neat thing about the antenna is this. You can take this antenna up and you can roll it up in a ball. You could throw it in a go bag and take it along. And with a piece of like ranger cord or a rope or a tree to throw it up in, you could get this up at high elevation, and it works very well. So here's the ladder line rolled up in a coil, and as you can see, it rolls up into a pretty neat little coil, and this could go into a go bag or in the back of your vehicle or whatever you need. And it has the correct connector to go to regular coax. You could use a piece of regular coax coming out of your radio. So it's really, just uncoil there. So it's really a very practical, usable antenna. And I simply tied a piece of rope to it, connected to the radio, tied a piece of rope, and I threw it up against a piece of conduit that I had, and I put it against the fence, and I hoisted it up as far as I can get it. And it turned out to be a pretty good repeater eater. It hits all the local repeaters very well, and it hears very well. So it's a good option if you're looking for like a low profile, out of the way antenna that can go up in a tree that's a little more clandestine, won't bother your neighbors or anybody else who might be bothered by it. So just food for thought on the VHF side, and we'll talk more about VHF as time goes by. So okay, and maybe I'll do a video of the net on Sunday, and you can see what that looks like. Okay, well, hey, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. I know life is busy. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but hey, have a good day. Bye-bye.